Hello, I'm Rob Thomas from Club and Resort Business, and welcome to another episode of the Club and Resort Talks podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by JBD JGA Design and Architecture. Since its founding in 1983, JBD JGA Design and Architecture, formerly known as Judd Brown Designs and Jefferson Group Architecture, has successfully completed an impressive array of design projects for private clubs throughout the United States. Their experienced staff of more than 25 design professionals has completed a multitude of award-winning architectural and interior design projects, including golf clubs, country clubs, and city clubs. Learn more at jbd-jga.com. Now that we got that taken care of, let's introduce you to Phil Keren. Phil, our senior editor, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Rob. How are you?
Terrific. No complaints. What are you seeing in the news today?
Well, some good stories as always. This story actually kind of from my neck of woods. I'm originally from Ann Arbor, Michigan. There's a club, Travis Pointe Country Club, up there in Ann Arbor. They are working on a new master plan to help kind of reposition the club as one of the best courses in Michigan. Of course, the course opened in 1977. It's an 18-hole par 72 course. It was originally designed by Bill Newcomb. It has played host to the LPGA Volvic Championship, several tournaments, including the Epson Tour, Michigan Amateur Championship, U.S. Mid-Amateur qualifying, and they've had many U.S. Open and U.S. Senior Open qualifiers there as well. And one of the board members at Travis Pointe felt with the 50th anniversary of the club approaching, or the course approaching, thought it was a great time to work on enhancing sustainability and playability of the golf course. Those are two words we hear a lot these days with golf courses. Master plan, their goals include modernizing the course for sustainability, reducing maintenance costs, including labor, chemicals, water, etc. And I thought this last one was interesting, Rob. It talked about increasing playability and fun factor. That was in the story, in quotes. Fun factor for every category of member and playing ability from kids to senior. I thought the last one was interesting because I think if you went back, say, 5 or 10 years, and we were talking about a championship level course like Travis Pointe going through a master plan process, I don't think you would have heard the term fun factor in connection with improving the golf course. Again, because it's a championship caliber course, it's not something you're used to seeing. But I think, Rob, it kind of goes along with a lot of the themes we've talked about when golf courses undergo renovations now. They're trying to improve the playability of the course, which translated means, something where a wider array of ability player can play at the course. And I think that's great to see, and I'm sure it will still remain a championship caliber course as well.
Yeah, curious to see if that turns out to be a trend.
Mhm.
Obviously, we've seen a lot of golf courses kind of catering to non-golfers, or at least beginner golfers, because there's been a lot of people coming into the game since COVID. But I love the fun factor. That sounds like something that could interest me and my son. Get him out there and play golf. I know your boys play golf. My son does not. I would love to get him out on the golf course. And if I could say, hey, it's a fun factor, boom, let's do it.
That's right. There you go. Yeah, it's interesting. I would be interested to see what they mean by it. I don't think the story went into any details about what the fun factor means exactly, but hey, I think it's great. I think I'm sure at least at some level we're talking about a wide range of teeing ground opportunities, so that distance isn't such a, because as we know, for a beginning golfer, walking up to a hole that's 550 yards long and par five, dog leg left or whatnot, something that's really tough can be pretty intimidating. So if you shorten that, that would probably help. I'm sure that's at least part of the fun factor, but it should be fun. Should be great to see what they do with that.
Well, considering
Um,
Doc Keren and Mrs. Keren still live in Ann Arbor, we'll have to get you up there when this is all done for a feature of some sort.
yes, absolutely. And I will say, since I mentioned I'm from Ann Arbor originally, I have never played at Travis Pointe Country Club. Not played the course before. Uh, One of my friends in high school, who was our top level golfer, I know played there many times, and said it was an excellent course. So I'm sure it will be it'd be a great one to check out once they finish the plan. And I think it's supposed to. Yeah, you know what? I'll have to double check. I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me as to when it's done. But when it is, be happy to go up there and check it out for sure.
Terrific. Well, hey, my brother in Burgundy, what's next?
There we go. I know we're matching here. That's good. In well, I always have to have a Florida one. South Seas on Captiva Island, along Florida's Gulf Coast, opened a new 12-hole golf course called the Clutch. Another thing we've talked about a lot: the short courses, the different layouts, different number of holes, if you will. By the way, I love that name, the Clutch. And this one, according to our story this week, it's a family-friendly short course with a refreshing, and here it is again, fun-focused addition to the resort's continued rebuilding efforts following all the damage and devastation was caused by Hurricane Ian. Uh, this was designed by Bo Welling. We've seen Bo's name before and some of the other ones we've talked about. Again, emphasis on playability, ease, and enjoyment. Clutch, it's now, as they were telling us in the story this week, that officially open for play. And nice features about it too. It is, obviously it is a walking focused course, great scenery overlooking water throughout much of it. Nice features. It probably take an average of 60 to 90 minutes to play, but also golf carts are available to allow the course to be accessible. 12 holes total, so it should be a great course. It reminded me because the course I grew up at, which was an executive par three, in fact, did not have any riding carts. So if you needed that accessibility thing, it would have been difficult. The place I grew up at, hopefully they've probably taken care of that by now. But it's great to see this course, another setup of a short course. I'm glad to see it too because again, it's another feature to bring more people to the game of golf.
Well, fun fact, my wife and I got married on a beach in South Seas, and right before Hurricane Ian, we took our kids back there to experience that. As you know, they couldn't do it obviously when my wife and I got married. I got to play the golf course before Hurricane Ian. It was a 9-hole golf course at the time, but carts, a lot of fun. But looking forward to getting back there now. It gives me an excuse to go and see what the Clutch is all about.
Yeah, that sounds great. It should be an excellent, another great entry point to the game for people. And I'm just curious, how was the course, the 9-hole course, when you played it back then?
It was fun. The bunkers had been washed out. They had been getting inundated, so they figured they were going to do a full renovation at the time before the hurricane, or I mean, wiped out the resort. The hurricane did a lot more damage to the resort than it did just to the golf course. But the resort was fantastic. Yachting. They have multiple pools, biking, a lot of fun. It's kind of tucked away at the end of this string of islands. Sanibel Island's right out there. A lot of great, nice restaurants. A lot of fun. The bubble room, I think, is one of the most popular bars, which is just right down the beach you walk down to. So a lot of fun. I hope everything's back up and running. Not
Hmm.
just resort, but the surrounding areas. They really took the brunt of Hurricane Ian.
Yeah, sounds like they're getting things built back up down there. That's great. And now I'm going to head west to California. We saw a story this week about a big project out there at Desert Horizons Country Club in Indian Wells, California. $25 million renovation that included the main clubhouse renovation that actually have a new 2-story, 35,000 square foot addition. It's going to create modern amenities for the members and guests. That renovation is going to does include locker rooms, lounge rooms, card rooms, wellness center, fitness level, which we're seeing a lot more of in clubs these days, snack bar and golf shop with golf offices with new mechanical, electrical, plumbing, all the trades there throughout. Also, new commercial kitchen on site servicing the restaurant. It's a good quote here from the president. Actually, is it from CW Driver Companies? They're the company that did the project. Carl Kreuziger mentioned that the aesthetics of the club has stayed true to the original, but we've enhanced the functionality and accessibility of the space. So I think his comment actually kind of talks about sort of the balancing act clubs have, or club leaders have, with trying to achieve a what they're trying to figure out when a major project happens. They obviously want to offer something new, but at the same time, they want to try to do something to kind of preserve the look and stylistic parts of the space. Because after all, that's probably at least part of the reason why people became members there in the first place. So it's great to see them, Desert Horizons out there in California, striking the balance between those two items.
Yeah, 35,000 square foot addition. I mean, that's
Yeah,
massive. And $25 million goes pretty quick when you're starting to talk about something like that.
yeah, no kidding. That's one that's a nice project out there, and I think the members will be pleased with it.
Hey, give us a little teaser now that we got the news out of the way. Give us a little teaser about what's coming up next, who your guest is, and what they're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a great conversation with Eric Brey. He's one of the directors at GGA Partners. GGA they're an international consulting firm and advisor to many golf courses, private clubs, resorts, residential communities all around the world. And they've been working on they released a club members perspective report where and it's part of kind of a larger project, and you'll hear Eric talking about that. Um, but this one gathered survey responses from more than 3,500 club members in North America. They tried to get information from as wide of an age range, time of service or time of membership at a club, as wide of an audience they try as possible. They tried to get from club members, um, and they looked at kind of underlying reason behind members' behaviors at the club. And the report looked at kind of the four, I think you would call it the four adult generations we have today: silent generation, baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials. And they talked about the research got into what aspects of the club do the folks in each of these generations value the most. Also, what kind of concerns do they have? And of the folks who have a high opinion of their club, and it's many in these things, how many would actually be willing to pay more for this service? It also just offers a lot of great information for club general managers to understand what members like about their club, uh, and also what parts they feel could be improved, to keep them around as members. So it was a really interesting conversation with Eric, and yeah, with GGA Partners, they've got a lot of good research, and also interesting. We can look ahead to the fact that they are now doing a survey of club employees to understand better what's going on with them and how they feel about the organization they work for.
That sounds fantastic. Let's get to it.
Welcome back to Club and Resort Talks. I'm Phil Keren. Well, GGA Partners recently released a club members perspective report. This report is part of GGA Partners industry perspectives research, which is geared toward understanding what key stakeholders with clubs currently see and what the future holds for this area of the hospitality business. GGA Partners, with this research, gathered survey responses from more than 3,500 club members in North America. Some of the topics covered in the research included member motivations and value, understanding the club experience, and also looking at members' greatest concerns. Joining me to discuss the results is Eric Brey. He is a director at GGA Partners. Eric, welcome to Club and Resort Talks.
Bill, thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to spend some time with you and your listeners.
Great. Great. We appreciate you joining us here today. First of all, I just wanted to have you, can you tell us a little bit about what GGA Partners does and what you do there?
Certainly. So GGA Partners is the trusted advisor to clubs, resorts, golf courses, and residential communities around the world. As a firm, we were born out of the 1990s out of KPMG, and over the last couple of decades have grown to have offices in North America and Europe. We recently joined the ClubWorks Network of Excellence, and our work primarily focuses in three areas: strategy and operations, looking at and helping people and culture, and then acquisitions and mergers, or transactional advisory, if you will.
Okay, very good. And now in this, I gave folks, our listeners and viewers, a little bit of an overview of the research, but can you explain a little bit how this research project got started and why it was started?
Certainly. So, as you'd mentioned before, the Industry Perspectives is a series of research that looks at 4 key areas of our industry. Obviously, this one looks at the members and really understanding a forward-looking insight into how members are changing. In addition, we do work with club employees. That survey is actually going to initiate this summer, and that report will be out later this fall. And that's really the first attempt to really take a broad stroke and look at what makes the needs and desires of club employees different. In addition, we have partnered with CMAA on an annual club leaders perspective research. And this is an annual study that looks at what leaders are seeing within the industry. And then the final piece really is the club partners, and that's looking at those trends-focused research that really works with the partners. And these 4 areas are really meant to help establish a deeper understanding of what's going on in and around the club industry.
Okay, very good. So this one, and I mentioned in my introduction that, yeah, and this, as I understand it, you gathered responses from more than 3,500 club members in North America. Can you kind of, before we get into results, can you talk a little bit about the profile of the members who were surveyed?
Certainly. So when we look at those members, we were able to collect around 3,700 respondents. Of those, 65% were male. The majority were from North America. When you look at the average age was 61, with the average tenure at the club about 12 years. One of the things that we took really a good focus and emphasis on was making sure that all generations were well represented. As you look at the report and as we continue our conversation today, you'll see we really wanted to look at, what are those differences, but more importantly, what are those similarities between those generational cohorts? And we wanted to make sure that we had people of all ages, family status, full members, male, female, and just representative of a majority of the different types of people that you might come into when it comes in the club industry.
Okay, so you really did try to get a full, very broad look at as many members and many different types of members as possible.
Mhm.
Correct. All
Absolutely.
right. Excellent. So let's take a look at the results a little bit. And I think you mentioned generations. I know there's 4, or you can correct me if I'm wrong. 4 generations are represented in the report. We have the silent generation, baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials. That's correct, right?
That's correct. That really represents kind of the majority of members of clubs right now.
Right. Okay. Very good. And I know there's sort of kind of 3 areas that we can look at here today. We have the member value, club experience, and membership insight. So starting with member value, um, one thing I'm going to kind of, for folks watching this, and we're going to share a little bit about where people can see the report. What I'm looking at right now is on one of the early areas of the report. It's called member value and motivation insights, and just going to ask Eric to kind of speak to some of the main points, findings of these. So Eric, as I understand it, with under member value and motivation insights, one finding here is members are finding much more than just financial value from their experience. Can you kind of expand on that?
Yeah, I think, Phil, you and I, and probably anyone else in the club industry knows that members talk a lot about price and understanding that value when they compare that price to the experience satisfaction. But what we found from our findings is that members are finding the greatest value in that emotional connection or those feelings that they have with being a member of the club or being associated with the other members. This was the highest rated value. Behind emotions were the quality, and quality is that perceived value when you look at the performance of the overall experience. What really makes this unique is that while price is always, top of mind, we as an industry really are providing great value for the members when you look at emotional and quality. And so while members might grouse about price and the value, they're really finding great value from an emotional standpoint and a quality standpoint. The things that all these great operators are doing is really needs to be highlighted in the fact that these are some really great things that clubs are doing and members recognize it.
Okay, very interesting. I'm just curious. I don't know in this under this particular subject. Are there any differences among we mentioned those four generations? Any differences among them as far as this particular aspect of the research?
Yeah. So when you think about it, you look at that value. Millennials are obviously seeing, emotional value as one of the highest areas of importance. They want to be supported, and they're willing to pay more to elevate the member experience.
Hmm.
When you look at kind of some of those other differences, as members stay a little bit longer, um, baby boomers, for instance, they look at price value at a very similar level to other respondents. But as members have gotten, older or in a different generational cohort, some of those values do differ, but it's still that emotional connection. And we'll talk a little bit later on when we cover some of the other highlights when it comes to some of those generational differences.
Okay, fair enough. Again, we're again talking kind of on the member value issue. Another main finding from this was current experiences might meet members' expectations for satisfaction, but not all members are willing to spend more to maintain them. And you just talked about millennials being willing to spend more, but I guess speak to that statement a little bit more, Eric, on what you found.
So when we looked at it, 92% of members say they are enjoying the use of their club. However, that high percent did not necessarily equate to willing to pay more. When we looked at all of the responses, only 36%, or approximately one in three, would be willing to pay more to elevate their experience, while only 23% would be willing to pay more to maintain their experience. When you look at the greater economy, the things that are going on generally around the world, I think this really relates to inflation fatigue and then that exhaustion multiplier. Members, like everyone else, is just seeing the prices go up everywhere, and they're seeing that as a challenge, and they don't necessarily want to continue to contribute, even though they see the value in what they're offering. When you look at some of those generational differences, those that are willing to maintain, the range of differences is 21 to 24% between the cohorts. And so everyone that responds is, everyone that responded in those generations is pretty similar. Where the generational differences really change is whether or not they are willing to elevate or pay more for a better experience. And this really shows that almost half of all millennials are willing to pay more
Hmm.
to have more, whereas you look at the silent generation, that number goes down to 24%. And I think that ties directly to the long runway that younger members will get using the facilities.
I have to quick observation though. Obviously, that seems like in terms of you mentioning millennials, about half of them willing to pay more. I would imagine for club leaders, that's a promising thing for them look going forward.
It's promising, but it also creates a challenge because that's still a smaller number when you look
Hmm.
at the totality of all members. And we're seeing in our work that a lot of clubs are running into we want more younger versus those who are satisfied with what they've got, and they're not necessarily willing to pay more at that elevated or senior level. And so while it is a positive moving forward, it's going to be a few years of some friction as you've got these two very different camps when it comes to financial interest in contributing.
Right. I can see where that would be challenging for them as well to balance all those interests. And then the last one under member value, looking at the report, a main finding here was member motivations for belonging to a club can be placed into six definable areas. That's activities, culture, fulfillment, service, social environment, and accessibility. I guess I talk about these different areas, and I guess those member motivations. I guess again, Eric, maybe a little bit how they differ among the generations and what club leaders should keep in mind when looking at this information.
So what we found is that everything primarily, I mean, there's always going to be outliers. When members look for the motivation to join a club, it kind of fits into one of these six areas. And, the first or highest rated was accessibility.
Hmm.
Members want to be able to access and use those club facilities. When you look at that number one reason, millennials see that as somewhat more important than the rest of the generational cohorts, while having access is significantly less important to the silent generation. And so that kind of just shows that difference between those ages. The second most important was club culture, and that's the overall feeling and overall culture that members receive and get at the club. This was the second most important. And what we saw from the baseline average is that it's somewhat more important for millennials and Gen Xers, while it's somewhat less important really for the silent generation. And that difference continues to permeate throughout these areas. Service, quality, or personal comfort, again, third most important, somewhat more important for millennials, somewhat less important for that older generation. The one thing that really stuck out from this research is that we always talk about the differences between these generations. And when you look through the report, you'll see that these generational differences are significant. But the one thing that this research found is that there is a common core of motivation, and that's the social environment. When you look at the differences between the importance, it was statistically insignificant in that the interaction with other members and the personal networks are at that same level of importance. The final two things like club activities, those events and entertainment, again, more significant the younger it skews, less important for the silent generation. And the same with personal fulfillment, being able to see that professional development in that membership. And so again, here, the silent generation saw that, less important than everyone else.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Um, I apologize if I missed you saying it, or we were talking about what millennials felt were the most important areas, and it felt like we were kept you kept bringing up silent generation felt this was less important, less important. What did silent generation and baby boomers feel was or what is the top area for them? Those two groups, or if it's different each group?
So when you think about kind of those differences,
Mhm.
it really stays, along the same level. And so, club and, amenity accessibility is very much kind of at that higher level for all members. There wasn't really that change or that difference. Um, what we really wanted to highlight, though, is looking at those differences and trying to find those common themes. When you bring up the baby boomers, because of the size of the membership and what they represent within the club, they're typically considered kind of that average. And when we look at those differences, they really did represent kind of the overall average when looking across the generations.
Okay, interesting. That makes sense. Interesting about culture too, because I feel like that term culture is being used a lot when you're talking about organizations. I feel like I'm a sports fan. I feel like you hear that word used a ton now among athletic teams. If a coach builds a strong culture, right, then the team does better. People want to play for him, etc. I feel like that's talked about in work environments a lot as well. So it's interesting to see with the club environment that's also an issue that people are interested in seeing a sort of a culture. And I feel like the word is also one of those things where sort of it's one of those things where people kind of know it and feel it when it's there and it's happening in a positive way, and when it's not, they also kind of know it, even though it's kind of a hard thing to describe, right? Especially in a quantitative way, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Interesting. The next subject, next main subject within the report was club experience insights. This also looked interesting for us to touch on too. And again, kind of three main findings on this one. Also, as I read from the report, first one being to have you explore here, Eric, is millennials, members of Generation X, and females almost universally see all amenities and services as increasingly important compared to other respondents. I mean, lots already being said right there, but have you expand on that one, Eric?
So much like, in the previous discussion, when it looks at value, when we look at importance, millennials and Gen X, they typically see a higher level of importance when it comes to a certain amenity. So for instance, when you look at golf, millennials on a scale of 1 to 5, millennials place an importance of 4.1 out of 5 on golf. From there, it just kind of slowly declines, whereas the silent generation is at a 3.02. And so there was that very significant decline. And so while as golf might be the number one most important amenity, when you look at the silent generation, their most important is actually the casual dining experience, being able to go out to eat. And that makes sense when you look at members that might not be as active anymore. One of their key opportunities to engage with the club and their friends is through dining. And so that shift makes sense. But when you look at, golf is number one for most, casual dining is number two, golf practice facilities were number three, followed by fitness and wellness, and then social events. I think when you look at those top five, nothing really sticks out as kind of an aha moment. But what you mentioned when it came to females, almost universally, all females saw it as more important than average. So if you look at male versus female, females have a different level of expectation from the club. And as we see those numbers grow, I think clubs are going to have to recognize that there's a different expectation. There is a higher level, if you will, coming from many female members across all of these different amenities.
Okay, interesting. Um, Interesting to see that there. So the next one, looking at the club experience insights, it says a social environment and members feeling welcome are important considerations for clubs, and respondents agree their clubs are doing a good job at it. So obviously, a positive feedback here from club the respondents, the members of the clubs. Talk about that item a little bit more, Eric.
So I think, the biggest thing that I want to bring forth on that one, Phil, is that there's something hiding in the data that I want to bring forth. And I think the first one is that when you look at the number, 88% feel welcome. You're like, wow, that's a great number. Our members like it here. But when you take it from the opposite way, this means that 1 in 10 members don't feel welcome at their own club. That's a pretty significant number. Right now, the club industry, we have a very robust membership, we have waiting lists, but there's still 10% that are concerned. When you look a little further into the report and you see the number that 68% of members feel they can develop social networks and make friends, you're like, okay, that's almost 70%. But again, the same thing is there. 3 out of 10 members don't think it's easy to make friends at the club. So there are underlying concerns that right now we're not focused on because where club industry is at. But as we move into that next cycle, whenever that cycle comes, these are numbers that some clubs are going to have to grapple with and realize that there's work to be done to make sure every member that's there is engaged, enjoying it, and feeling that sense of belonging.
Okay, yeah, that is interesting, and I hadn't thought about it that way. It's interesting, like when you started that off, and you say 88% feel welcome, and I thought, well, that's great, that's positive. But you raise a fair point. I mean, 12% don't. So, and I realized too, like you said, it's sort of hidden in the numbers. That is significant because obviously the goal of club leaders is they want everyone, all of their members, to feel welcome, so they'll continue coming back, encourage others to join, and everything too. So very interesting. I did want to move on though. The other item here under insights, which I also thought I was telling you before we started here, I thought this was very interesting. Um, Technology might not always be wanted as respondents indicate lagging adoption and implementation interest. So speak about that issue a little bit.
Yeah, so when we looked at a series of options when it looks to the future, at the top was a memorable dining experience. Then the laggard was, an interest in embracing modern technology. So this doesn't mean that clubs shouldn't be exploring ways to leverage AI, make things more operationally efficient. But when you look at member facing, I think it's important to know that even younger members, they still want that face to face. They want the frictionless experience that technology might provide them, but it's still a person to person industry. And so when you look at it that way, the technology number, it does make sense. And I think that as we look at younger members and the more they join, that number will obviously change. But it's important that we can't look at technology as a way to replace that one-on-one interaction.
Okay. Yeah, well said. That's obviously it's a people business, a people industry, and it's clearly needs to continue to be that way, even with all the amazing things we have with technology right now, for sure. And then finally, I know we had within the report, again, sort of under the main headings, membership insights, and I'll have you touch on some of these, Eric. I know one of the main findings under that category said, even in times of economic uncertainty, disposable income and club spending are expected to stay constant. I guess I'll have you speak to that issue and what that means for club leaders.
Yeah, when you look at the numbers, 79% or approximately 80% plan to keep spending at the same level at the club. While 16% might see a potential decline, the robustness of members see the club now as that third place. And these numbers are a strength in that regardless of what might be going around when it comes to the economy or inflation, they see this as an important spend, and they're going to keep doing it.
Okay, very good. Some positive
Mhm.
information here for club leaders, for GMs listening and watching us. Um, Another one to touch on here, one of these under membership insights, members like the changes they see at their clubs, and the lack of interest in leaving their club supports it. So, have you speak to that one a little bit?
Yeah, so the first time we did this study was in 2020. And over kind of that 3-year period, we saw that 14% less respondents noted that they are likely to leave the club. And so what we've seen since the start of COVID is that clubs are doing a good job of engaging and creating the environment that members want to stay at. You look at some of the things that might drive a member or the things that they indicated might give them pause to leave. The two biggest ones were a deterioration of club activities, which is the top one, and the second was increased dues.
Mm.
And as long as clubs and club leaders can continue to make sure they are creating the experiences, renovating or innovating the facilities that the members want to see, there might be, some pushback, but members want great facilities and they want it done in a very fiscally smart manner.
Okay, very good. You're talking about facilities, and then the next item finding concerns personnel and staffing more. This one says members agree with club leaders that staffing is an important concern for club sustainability. So that brings up an interesting future challenge for club leaders. Talk about that one.
Yeah, so what we've seen is that the emphasis on recruiting staff is up 25% from the first iteration. Staff retention is up 20%, and rising labor costs are up 14%. And so when you look at survey versus survey, just like leaders, finding the right people and being able to keep them and afford them is top of mind. When we first did this research, in 2020, there was a big concern about members, member spending, member resignations, sales usage, things of that line. And since that first study, those concerns have dropped significantly. For instance, member spending has gone down 21% since the first iteration. So members see a robust membership, they're using it, they're engaged, but what they see is there's not enough people or enough right people to take care of their needs at the club.
Okay, very interesting. Hey, sorry, a little bit of a side question here, Eric, on that. I was curious. You mentioned the first iteration of this research was done in 2020. It, we all know what happened in 2020 with COVID and everything. So I was curious about that. At what point in 2020 had you launched that research? Was it during sort of the heart of the pandemic?
It was after, kind of the world shut down. And
Okay, it
so
was after.
it
Okay.
was a little later. And so when you look at that data, we know that that's not necessarily a benchmark for everything because it was such a weird time, but it does show, especially this last line of thought, in that, back then they were concerned about themselves. Now they're worried about the people, the staff that are providing that. And so even though it's not a perfect comparison, it does
Right.
show how members have changed their thinking over the last 3 years, 3, 4 years.
Okay. Right. Good point. Yeah. And that's what you saw what I was getting at too.
Mhm.
Obviously, accounting for the fact that it was a very, very highly unusual time that we went through there in 2020 for sure. Um, in the last one on their membership insights, to touch on briefly here, this finding states while most members will continue to use the club at the same rate, use by younger members will continue to grow. So, a positive finding there. Talk about that one.
So what we wanted to really understand is when you look at clubs, a lot of clubs are seeing significant traffic that hasn't abated since the pandemic. And we really wanted to find out, okay, so are we at kind of the max peak of club usage, or will it change? And what we found is that millennials and Gen Xers, they increased usage over the last 2 years, and they expect to increase their usage moving forward. This is different than the boomers and the silent generation in that, they haven't necessarily increased their usage over the last 2 years, and they don't necessarily expect to increase it. So while they might not be using it less, you've got those younger people who are going to find new and different ways to keep using the club more. And that will kind of offset by the older generations who they're going to keep using it, but they might not grow. They might be at that level that they're satisfied with usage.
Okay, makes sense. Well, okay, this a lot of information here, Eric, that we've been going through over the last half hour. So, what are your I know it's not an easy thing to try to put to recap and summarize everything, but if you were talking to a club general manager, of course we are talking to them by having this on today, what would be the biggest takeaways, biggest say, I don't know, 3 or 4 takeaways that they should take from this and try to implement at their club going forward?
So I think the first one comes down to value.
Mhm.
Everyone talks about the cost benefit, but that emotional connection, those other types of value, members are seeing, value in those areas. And club leaders should pay attention and know that if they really amplify that value, the discussion about cost benefit might shift when members see, look, yeah, my price is going up, but wow, I love it here. I have that emotional connection. I have the friends. I have those relationships. I think that's the first one. Second is that younger members really do place a higher importance on most club areas. And, the growth of female representation in clubs as it grows, it's important to know that they see a significantly higher level of importance compared to the other members. So this newer generation is going to have different expectations, which we know. We just didn't know in which areas. Third, members' concerns mirror those of managers. Leaders, sometimes, members have their own areas, their own interests, but there is that growing concern in both groups that finding the right people is important. We've also highlighted generational differences, that is valuable. But I think the hidden data, that 1 in 10 don't feel welcome and that 3 in 10 don't find it easy to make friends at their club are numbers that, should be paused for concern. Not necessarily right now, but something for leaders to put in the back of their minds as we continue to go through, the next couple of years.
Okay, very good. Very interesting. Eric, I appreciate you joining us here today on Club and Resort Talks. What actually before we get going here, what if people watching or listening today want to view this full report, how could they do that?
I think the easiest way to access it, Phil, is simply go to ggapartners.com and in the search bar, just search for member perspective. That's probably the easiest way to send people there without trying to share an extraordinarily long URL address.
Okay, that's fair enough. I'm sure people appreciate that simpler approach for sure. Well, Eric, I appreciate your time. A lot of interesting insights, a lot of interesting things for people to for club leaders to think about as they move forward. Think about, ways in which they can retain membership, grow membership, and make members feel more welcome at the club. Not that they don't; most of them do already feel extremely welcome there. Just improve that more. A lot of interesting insights there for people to learn about and hopefully grow from. Eric, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Phil.
You're welcome. And I just want to remind everybody viewing and listening today, if you want to view other podcasts like this one, visit clubandresortbusiness.com. And of course, you can go there too to check on all of our other club industry news and stories from the day. Until then, take care, stay well, and have a great day.